All right, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about polynomials. So I am on one of my favorite websites for references, and it's called purplemath.com. And you can go to this website and type in just about anything you're looking for, and something should come up. So this is about polynomials and what they are, how to name them, that kind of thing. So polynomial, we've talked about, just means many terms, and they're just the sums or differences of terms. That's what polynomials are. So examples of things that are polynomials would be, or not polynomials. Let's talk about that first. Negative exponents. Then variables with variables in the denominator. That's also not a polynomial term. Another one would be the square root of a variable. Notice it says only a variable. And then, so examples of things that are would be something like 4x squared, because it does obey all those rules. It does not have a negative exponent. It does not have a variable in the denominator. It does not have the square root of a variable. And believe it or not, this example right here next to this is also a polynomial term. And it is okay because the exponent is on the variable, and it is not in any of these places. It should not be. The square root of 3 is just a number. 5 to the 2/3 power is actually just a number. So that one is actually okay, believe it or not, as crazy as it looks. So some things we need to learn about for polynomials would just be, what is a term? And an example of a term would be 4x squared. We've got a number and a variable. That's an example of a term. And then 3x is also a term. 7 is considered a term as well, even though it doesn't have a variable. We call it the constant. So other things we need to know is what are coefficients and what is a leading coefficient. So notice that this is in standard form. Highest exponent comes first, then the next lowest, and then finally the constant. When you write a polynomial in standard form, the leading coefficient is that number on that term with the highest exponent. So it is 4x squared is a leading term per se, and so the leading coefficient would be 4. So if you're asking for leading coefficient, that's what that means. Now, degree really is talking about the power that's on the variable. It's really what it's talking about. So the degree of this example would be 2. That's the highest exponent that we see. And then that's probably going to be the case for most things that we look at. You're just going to look for the highest variable. There are other variations of that, but we usually don't get into that too much. So here's an example. We want to give the degree and give the values of the leading coefficient and constant term, if any. All right, when we look at this, it appears to be in standard form. I see 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. The leading coefficient is going to be on the x to the 5th term because it's the highest variable. Leading coefficient would be 2. The degree would be 5. And the constant would be 9. So that's how we pick that out. What if it's not in standard form like this one? The highest exponent is 4. So that means your leading coefficient is going to be on that term. So it is a positive 7. The degree is also going to be the highest exponent. That's 4. And then there are 3 terms. And then the constant would be, well, we don't have one because there is no just regular old number in there. So you don't always have to have it. Okay. So let's flip on over here to CUDA. And I got a couple other examples that we're going to look through. We're going to name these by the degree and number of terms. Okay, so on the other page, what really did is just kind of tell what they were. But I want to know, what would you technically call these polynomials if I ask you for a name, first by degree and then by terms? So first thing you probably want to do is write it in standard form. It's not necessary, but you can. If you wrote this in standard form, what would come first? The 9x squared. Actually, negative 9x squared. So the highest exponent is 2. What do we call it when the highest exponent is 2? That is quadratic. And then the term number would be whatever 3 terms is. So that would be a trinomial. So for this one, we're looking at quadratic trinomial. For number 2, we've got just 1 term, but the first thing we want to look at is the degree. Now it's a 3, so that's cubic. And then 1 term is a monomial. So you're always going to have the exponent name first and then the polynomial name second, like the nomial name. All right, for this one, what's your highest exponent? 1, right? Right there it is. So when it's the highest exponent of 1, we call that linear. There are 2 terms, so that's a monomial. For number 4, your highest exponent is 3. So that is a cubic. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. When we get past 3 terms, we don't do a cute little name. We just say a polynomial and then tell how many terms it has. So I'm going to call this one a cubic polynomial with 4 terms. I'm going to turn the answers on here so you can make sure that we did all those right. And there they are. I just want to briefly go through right here and just name the leading coefficient in all these terms, because I think that's one thing that sometimes people do not understand all the way. But highest exponent's x squared. So the leading coefficient of this polynomial would be -9. Yes, it is okay to have a leading coefficient that's negative. Leading coefficient here would be 6. That's the only term. Leading coefficient on this one would be -9. Again, I'm just looking at the term with the highest exponent. And lastly, on this one, find that term with the highest exponent. What's the coefficient there? -4. So that is how you can determine the leading coefficient and name polynomials.